And welcome to a special edition of 3 Yards Per Carry. I'm Alfredo Arteaga. Simon Clancy is here with me. Obviously, this is an emergency podcast. We're going to talk about Mike McDaniel being fired and the way forward. We're going to try to wrap it up all nicely for you here in a tight 20 minutes. But if you want to interact with us, you want to get the latest news on the GM search, possible Harbaugh pursuit, you got to become a member of our Discord. And to do that, you go to discord.gg/OnlyFins. Join on a desktop. Everybody keeps asking me, you keep saying it's $4.99, but I see that it's more money. No, that's if you're on your iPhone, they will charge you an extra fee. So avoid the Apple upcharges. Do it on a desktop. It's $2.99 read-only, $4.99 all access. We have a vetted tier, but we do recommend that you become a member of all access first. So go there. I always provide a link to every single one of our promotions and join right there. It's right under my name, discord.gg/OnlyFins. All right, Simon, they did the thing. Mike McDaniel, 2 days removed from when he took to the podium and said, oh, yeah, I'm a great resource. I'll be involved in the
I'll be in the DM interviews.
Yeah, evidently he met with Stephen Ross, and Stephen Ross said, no, this is not going to work. You are dismissed. He will be interviewing for the Cleveland Browns job soon.
He'll definitely have interviews. I mean, he jumps right to the top of the class in terms of offensive coordinators. I mean, I think every team with Tampa, Cleveland, all these places looking for offensive coordinators will absolutely.
If you want to jump off a bridge, NFL Live has provided us the opportunity to all just march right off, hand in hand and jump off the bridge together, because they said that the dream team would be Brian Flores as head coach in Baltimore with Mike McDaniel as his offensive coordinator. If that happens,
not necessarily Flores, but can you imagine McDaniel with Lamar and Derrick Henry? I mean, oh my God, that would be. Can you imagine McDaniel with Jaden Daniels, or that's Yeah, he won't be out of work for long. I can tell you that much for free.
Yeah, he's gonna have an opportunity. What do you? And let's before we put that to bed and we talk about the future, because that's what this is about. This podcast is about. How would you look back at the Mike McDaniel era? Because in my opinion, I'll give my opinion first. I'm gonna look back on it much more fondly than I did the Adam Gase experience, or the Joe Philbin experience, or even the Tony Sparano experience. To be honest with you. There was real promise there. He was just not ready, right? He was just not ready to be a head coach.
Yeah, look, there was hope. We did have some great times, beating Dallas, getting into the playoffs, beating Buffalo at home, the running out of things that he did. No, the 70 against Denver, the offense, Tyreek, the trade when Tua was great in 23.
4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter against the Ravens to come back to win.
But just too many missed opportunities. He couldn't win the big games. He couldn't win on the road. He couldn't win in the cold weather. Just sounds like the quarterback, really. But unfortunately, just couldn't get over the hump. And just, some of the cultural issues that seem to raise. I know that I've spoken to a couple of them this afternoon. There's some pretty unhappy journalists in terms of, they like Mike. I spoke to him on a number of occasions. He was really nice. He's interesting. And, that is not, he is not a difficult cover if you're a journalist. I think the players generally liked him. Obviously there's some high profile, Jalen Ramsey, for example, but, I think certainly from people that I know within the organization, he was well liked, schematically, generally excellent. And there was hope. There really was. But unfortunately, it died on the vine. And, I go back to that, was it the 23 season, maybe the 22 season? We were 8-2, 8-3, and we go to San Francisco and we score on the first play, the touchdown to Trent Sherfield. At that point, we're the best team in the NFL. We're 7-0 up against the 49ers.
I could have swore I was at a friend's house and we were having a watch party after that play. I looked at my wife. She looked back at me, and I'm like, I think we're going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, and really it kind of collapsed from then. And I think, you go back to, the terrible game against Tennessee where we ended up blowing.
I'll go even further. You know when it collapsed? Remember, we score on that play to Trent Sherfield. The very next series, Jimmy Garoppolo is the quarterback. And Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb tackle him, and he break his fibia. Yeah. And they're kicking a field goal, successful. Yeah. It's going to be 7-3. Brock Purdy comes in.
Yeah, tears
and
us apart.
we lose the game directly to Brock Purdy.
But
That was the beginning of the end.
You go back to that Baltimore game that we needed to win. We ended up losing 56-19 or whatever the score.
Yeah.
Games like that, just where we just, So look, I look back on it, on parts of it fondly, but it's a business. We didn't win a playoff game. We didn't win a division title. We certainly didn't win a Super Bowl. We're in cap hell. We've got massive issues at quarterback. So, how can you look back at it on anything other than, utter disappointment? But I did think he was, he's so innovative. He's so creative. The offense looks sexy, and it's going to be ugly for a while. And I think it would have been ugly with him. But, I think that the Dolphins, we've all complained both on this podcast and on the Discord and privately to each other that, we want some adult decisions to be made. And, we've harped on enough on this podcast about how we wanted a new GM and a new head coach and a new front office. And we're going to get that. We are going to get that. And I applaud Stephen Ross. Do you know what I applaud Stephen Ross for mainly is the hiring of Troy Aikman. Because I'm not saying that Aikman, is responsible for any of this, but I think what Aikman has done is just make them see finally, they're so myopic, is finally make them see something outside of their own, their own little world of everything's okay and everything's, it's all right. And I saw something that I think it was Barry Jackson who's been all over this story. Barry tweeted about how the Dolphins front office are aware of the fan base and they read. So Tom Garfinkel is on social media, Tom Garfinkel follows me on social media. So he must have seen at times some of the spume that I tweet out or others tweet out that he follows, the Dolphins fans or whatever. He must know. He's not stupid.
And hold that thought, because I got to let my dog in. My dog is trying to knock down my door.
I think that I'm happy that we're now in a situation where, we are going to get a bit of a reset. We're going to get a new general manager, and unless it's Champ Kelly, which I don't think it will be, we're going to get a general manager from another building. For the first time in many, many years, we're going to get a general manager from out of the building, and the general manager and the head coach are going to be paired together, for better or for worse. And I think that's interesting. I think that's exciting. And I think that's something to look forward to. And yes, there's going to be some depressing seasons, but I hope that Steve Ross is honest and open to himself and to these coaching and GM candidates when he says, look, you know what? I want to win as quickly as possible. Vinny, what's up? I want to win as quickly as possible. But I also am aware that this is, we're in cap hell. We've got lots of big decisions to make over the quarterback and over the wide receiver and over the defensive end and over the free safety / nickel and over all of these guys. It's not going to be an instant turnaround. It's going to be a couple of seasons. We need to get a quarterback. We need to, and I hope that there's some confidence in knowing that, okay, if it's Coach A or Coach Z or Coach 2 or Coach 43, that they're going to get a bit of time and to build together with a general manager. But ultimately, I think it's a day that had to happen. Nobody likes to see somebody get sacked. These people are human beings, after all. I'm sure Mike McDaniel was under enormous pressure. Nobody likes to see anybody lose his job, but fortunately, he'll go to another place and get a good job. And I wouldn't surprise me if he comes back in maybe even one more cycle's time, but certainly 2 cycles' time, and he's a successful head coach because he'll probably learn from his mistakes and he'll still have that innovative offensive mind. And if he gets with a Lamar Jackson or something like that, then he could do wonderful things.
Yeah, I just wanted to show on camera what was trying to knock down my door here. There he is. All right, buddy. All right, go to bed. Go to bed. All right, that was the great Vinny Arteaga making an appearance on the podcast. It goes deeper, Simon. Like you said, it is a business. It is an entertainment vehicle as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're Stephen Ross, you're thinking, look, first of all, we're talking about winning a playoff game like it actually means something. Winning a division kind of means something. Winning an winning the AFC championship game means something. Winning Super Bowls, making Super Bowl appearances, those mean something. The level of success here is now set at winning a playoff game. Since the Dolphins have won a playoff game, let's just take the Hurricanes. They played in 2 natties. They're trying to play in a third. They won 1. They have a chance to win a second. The Miami Heat have been to 7 NBA finals and won 3 titles. The Florida Panthers have a President's Cup trophy, 2 Stanley Cup titles, and 3 Stanley Cup finals appearances. They created a soccer team, for Christ's sake. They got Lionel Messi here. They won a Leagues Cup and an MLS Cup. Like, anybody who's played any sports down here has had success, except the Dolphins. They just sit around not winning anything year in and year out. Stephen Ross has to be kind of sick of this already. And you know how they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again. He's only hired first-time head coaches. So I would say you have to be all in on John Harbaugh, because that's the only thing you haven't done if you're Stephen Ross. You haven't made that move. You agree?
Yeah, I think that's the move that he wants. And look, the connections run extremely deep. You know, I was told this morning that whilst we all know that Jim Harbaugh and Stephen Ross have a very close relationship from their Michigan ties, John Harbaugh and Stephen Ross also have an extremely close relationship, and they have done for some time. It's just not something I knew about at all. And I reiterated the point, do you not mean Jim Harbaugh? And they were like, no, John Harbaugh and Steve Ross have a very close relationship. And I think that you can get into, I mean, there's so many different angles that we can go out of this, but you can get into the conversation, for example, about whether or not Miami reached out to John Harbaugh when he was fired. My understanding, I was told unequivocally that they did. I know that Barry Jackson and other people have said that wasn't the case. It doesn't necessarily mean that Miami reached out. It may be that Harbaugh reached out to Steve Ross, for example. There are too many coincidences. I trust my source implicitly. There are too many coincidences for it not to be a thing, especially when you throw into the mix the Chad Alexander thing. It was very, very clear.
Yeah, look, let me give you a little background, and then you could go on, Simon. Sorry to interrupt. On their website, they released bios of every single guy.
That's what I was going to say. Absolutely. They released the bios and the names of all these guys, and they were released very quickly. Boom, 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 boom. And they were released the same Pelissaro, Rappaport, Adam Schefter. Boom, boom,
and then
boom,
all
boom.
of a sudden it was, oops, throw in Chad Alexander too.
And it was done, we were told expressly by Stephen Ross. This wasn't a Troy Aikman thing. This wasn't a Dan Marino thing. This wasn't a Brandon Shaw thing. This was a Stephen Ross thing. You're telling me that the owner did not know that John Harbaugh was about to hit the market with a guy that he has worked with him for many, many years and he's really close to? I just don't buy that. I just don't buy that. I'm really sorry. I don't. And I love Barry and I love, and he's great and he may well be right, but there are just too many coincidences there for me. I think it would just be stunning to assume that Stephen Ross, who in the past has had an eye on both, John Harbaugh's brother and Sean Payton, another seasoned coach with Super Bowl credentials, would not at the very least be massively intrigued by the option of John Harbaugh, right? Enough to dismiss a head coach for whom, by all indications and his own words this morning when he did it, that he had a huge amount of respect for and he loved, for example. So, I think that you go back to 2021, 22, whenever Mike was hired, I think he was the best hire possible at that time in terms of, they had a young quarterback that we didn't necessarily know. He clearly hadn't maxed out. We didn't know where we were going to go with that quarterback. And we brought in an innovative play caller. And by God, it worked for a little while, So I think that, he was the right guy at the right time. Unfortunately, now he's become the wrong guy. But I would not be in any way, shape or form surprised if Miami were not. And look, there's too much reporting this afternoon to say that Miami are now at the front of the queue along with the Giants. So why would Harbaugh come to Miami? We talked about it in the pod on Monday night. Why would he come? Well, clearly, these insiders, the Jonathan Joneses, the Albert Breers, the Peter Schrager's, there's clearly something there. Yeah. Why is he not being talked about in Cleveland? Why is he not being talked about in Atlanta? Why is he not being talked about? Why is it only the Giants and Miami? Yeah. Even before Mike McDaniel was fired, these same people were saying, Harbaugh would be it. Harbaugh's this, Harbaugh in Miami, Harbaugh in Miami. You've now got the New York media. You got Tiki Barber this afternoon on New York radio saying, Miami are we thought Harbaugh was a done deal for the Giants. Now Miami's in the mix, and we were scared about Miami before McDaniel got fired. So, but I don't think it's a done deal for Harbaugh. I still do wonder why he would come here. He's, 63, 64?
Yeah, 63.
So this is a 63-year-old coach without a quarterback, capped up with no salary cap whatsoever, with massive decisions to be made about the players we talked about at the top of the show, versus going to the Giants with the things that they've got in place. I still, and we're going to know pretty soon, Alf. We're going to know. We've been told by Jeff Darlington that the Dolphins are going to make their decision on the general manager tomorrow. These interviews are happening right now as we talk. I mean, it's what, 7:28 UK time, 2:28 your time. We're probably going to know it will probably be leaked tonight or overnight who is likely to be the general manager. I don't think it's going to be Champ Kelly. I did think it was going to be Josh Williams if McDaniel stayed. I think those two are out. I think Williams was McDaniel, and I think it's Chad Alexander, and I think it's John Eric Sullivan. And the name to me, and I said it on Monday, and Chris has been saying it, but the name to me over and over again over the last month, 6 weeks, has been John Eric Sullivan is the guy that they want in terms of what he was able to do, being around that Green Bay team. He has no connection with Harbaugh, right? But what he does have a connection with are coaches like Jeff Hafley, who's done an amazing job as a defensive coordinator of the Packers, was a head coach at Boston College and a successful one, at a mid-major school. He's not going to win the ACC because, it's Boston College, right? Or it's Adam Stenavich, very, very highly regarded offensive line coach, offensive coordinator with Matt LaFleur. The third elephant in the room is Matt LaFleur.
Yeah.
And we talked about it on Monday, the contract situation. I think it's contract posturing, but to me, Matt LaFleur is up there above Harbaugh.
Yeah, I think it's obvious. If you go with it, John Eric Sullivan, you're watching that Bears-Packers game.
And I don't think they're making a hire immediately. I don't think if it's John Eric Sullivan, he gets announced tonight or tomorrow. I don't think that they're making a decision tomorrow and say, okay, this is our list. I think they wait a few days and they see what happens with the Packers game against Chicago, and they see what happens with the financial situation with Matt LaFleur, or whether LaFleur gets fired. He might get fired. I mean, it would be astounding if he did. And then the Chad Alexander thing, yes, there are lots of links to John Harbaugh, but there's also a link to Jesse Minter, for example, who is also linked to Stephen Ross because he was defensive coordinator at the University of Michigan. So I don't necessarily think that John Harbaugh is the absolute, I'm sure Steve Ross will absolutely be bending over backwards to try and get Harbaugh, at least for an interview. But I would not be surprised if John Eric Sullivan's like, I can work with Harbaugh, absolutely fine. But if he decides he wants to go to the Giants, for example, I could bring you these guys, Hafley, I could bring you Stenavich, I could potentially bring you Matt LaFleur, and Chad Alexander will be saying, I love John. We're good friends, we can work together, absolutely. But if he doesn't come, here is Jesse Minter, young defensive coordinator, hungry. You know him, Steve, because of the Michigan days, yada, yada, yada. So I think it's exciting. It's, it's interesting. It's, in a weird way, we're kind of at the bottom of the barrel, and the only way up for us now is up. And these are the, if they were to turn around and go, oh, Mike McDaniel's staying and it's going to be Josh Williams, that's not that exciting moving forwards. Now if they turn around and say, yep, that it's John Eric Sullivan and John Harbaugh, or it's John Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley, you're like, okay, cool. It's a new start. It's a new beginning. We move forwards. We ride. Here we go. Let's see what this can bring. So, yeah, I who knows where it's going to go? I wouldn't be surprised. The other name that I think we should all keep an eye on is Anthony Campanile, who is well known in Miami because obviously he was here. Steve Ross knows him, but he was also the linebackers coach of the Packers last year. He's gone to the Jags. They've got one of the best top 5 defenses in the NFL, and you're going to see them at the weekend against Buffalo. They've been awesome all season. Half a season without Travis Hunter. They've done a brilliant job. Campanile, as you could attest to, I mentioned in Discord maybe 3 months ago that he was a name that I was repeatedly being told about how the Dolphins love his style, love his kind of what he brings to the table. So I think he's another John Eric Sullivan person who might be in the mix if the Dolphins choose to go in that direction. I think I would be pretty surprised at this point if the GM hire is not Sullivan or Alexander, and if the head coach is not Minter, Stenavich, Hafley, Campanile, or Harbaugh. I think I'd be surprised if it's one of the, anybody out of those 5. Now, I see Jeremy Fowler talking about Jim Schwartz and Joe Brady. I just don't see that. I think Schwartz is too old, and it runs a 3, that kind of stylized 3-4 defense with that kind of overhang. We just don't have that guy. Ruben Bain might be that guy, but does he get to you? And that's kind of a long way down the line, and yeah, I think that's the direction they'll end up going in.
Yeah, Joe Brady, by the way, my neighbor.
Okay.
So I'll go knock on his door if he gets offered the job. Are we not mentioning Anthony Weaver because we have 2 third-round picks dancing in our heads? Because he is interviewing for 3 jobs. If he doesn't get one of these 3 jobs, I would be surprised, right?
Yeah, he's really well liked. he's really well liked in Miami, and
does a Chad Alexander Anthony Weaver matchup actually works?
Potentially. I mean,
now here's the thing, and I asked this question on our Discord, and again, right there, discord.gg/OnlyFins, if you want to interact with us directly about GM searches, the players, the games, the college football playoff, whatever. I asked this on our Discord, and it was overwhelming. Would you rather have Anthony Weaver as your head coach, or would you rather have 2 third-round picks?
Yeah. 2 third-round picks.
What would you rather have?
I love the draft, so I take that.
The 2 third-round picks, right? That would give us four third-round picks inside of 2 seasons. It's draft capital.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need it.
Yeah.
So
it's exciting. Look, it's exciting.
Yeah.
We haven't had much excitement. We haven't, and we're reveling in somebody else's disappointment. But yeah. I mean, bring it on.
Yeah, it just didn't work out. It just didn't work out for Mike McDaniel.
Unfortunately,
it was all within his hands. He played, like I said, like every one of those seasons. You could almost trace it to that one moment, right? And we never came through in that one moment. And we could go, and I guess we'll end it right here. 2022, the game in Buffalo in the snow, 8-point lead late in that game. Josh Allen puts on his cape. We lose on a walk-off field goal. In the playoffs with Skylar Thompson, you have them beat. Okay, you're at the 41-yard line. You're essentially 10 yards. You're already pretty much in Jason Sanders' field goal range, but there's almost 2 minutes left. You score a touchdown down there, you could win that game in the playoffs. Of course, they have the procedural issues. They don't get home on 4th and 1. That started the 4th and 1 and 3rd and 1 failures. 2023, those are the famous failures of the game in Baltimore, of course, the game against the Titans at home. You win the game against the Titans at home, you're playing the Steelers at home in the first round of the playoffs. Simple as that. So you were a Titans loss at home on Monday Night Football, a terrible team, by the way, that year, from reaching a goal that probably saves Mike McDaniel's job. Of course, you lose the last game of the season against Buffalo. 2024, the Tua concussion, the inability to get Tyler Huntley or Tim Boyle or Skylar Thompson to play adequately, and you miss the playoffs. And then you have this season, okay, which pretty much came down to that Steelers game. You win that Steelers game, you have a shot at 9 wins. How are you going to fire a guy who's had 3 winning seasons inside of 4 seasons? So he always had that opportunity. He always failed. So I guess we'll leave it out right there. What will
throw 2 names into the mix that I think, I know we've said this is what it's going to be, and it comes in that Matt LaFleur area. Like Matt LaFleur would be the absolute dream. Sean McDermott, if Buffalo lose to Jacksonville at the weekend, there's a possibility that Sean McDermott loses his job. I think you have to have the conversation. Would he jump to an AFC East team? I think it's potentially unlikely. You have to have the conversation. The other name, if Ross doesn't want a first-time head coach, and I know that Jeff Hafley is not a first-time head coach because he obviously coached at Boston College, but if that, and obviously Harbaugh isn't. The other name, if it's John Eric Sullivan, worth bearing in mind, is Mike McCarthy, because he was at Green Bay during the time, obviously, that he won a Super Bowl there with John Eric Sullivan when he was there as a scout and personnel. He is the other, and he's got interviews. I think Tennessee and the Giants, I think, are interviewing him. I think he would be a name. If Steve Ross says, I can't deal with another, young guy, I think Mike McCarthy would be a name worth. Steve Ross or Troy Aikman will have had to have said to John Eric Sullivan, "What do you think about Mike McCarthy? If we're looking for a veteran coach, who's the veteran coach that you've worked with that you think actually he could still do a job? He's still, I remember seeing that Peter King interview with McCarthy, and a few years ago, maybe 3 seasons ago, when McCarthy was talking about how he kind of keeps his, his toe in the modern game. And I just think that if Steve Ross is of that mind, that would be a veteran name. If it is Sullivan, who he would say, I can still do a job with Mike McCarthy.
Oh.
I mean,
we're going to talk about all of it next time on the next 3 yards per carry. Maybe
We'll
we'll have
probably tomorrow by all the way that the news sphere is going. We'll probably be back tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll probably be back tomorrow with a new general manager, and who knows, maybe a pursuit of John Harbaugh. That's where I start and I finish. He's 82 years old. Do what you've never done before, right? Like the Dolphins lately, at least for the last few years, they've just said, okay, where have we failed? Let's just do the complete opposite. Well, where have you failed for the last, 12, 15 some odd years? You keep hiring first-time head coaches. All of that goes away with the hire of John Harbaugh. Go and do it. Go and close it. That's the way I start. That's the way I end. We shall see. We will learn more about this tomorrow. Okay. As soon as news breaks, we will be right back with you. But till then.